You recognize me? Who am I? Elephant. Thank you very much. I'm Rabbi Elephant.
Who's in this costume?
Don't tell anyone.
It's a really big secret, but it is actually Rabbi Rubens, the one and only. Rabbi Rubens is the senior rabbi of Scotland, which means he's right at the top there.
Well, she better go.
Well, he has a conscience.
What's a mensch, Tati?
Mensch is
A decent
person.
What do I do? It's a difficult one. I'm the rabbi's wife. The rabbi's wife is called the Rebbitzin. Some Rebbitzins are quite, the Rebbitzin. But I don't think I'm like that.
My name is Mark Cohn. I own the only kosher deli in Scotland. The customer's always right.
My name is Kathleen Hagler. I grew up in Hungary, and then I lived in Israel, and then I came to Scotland.
My name's David Simons, and my grandmother said when the tram came to Battersea Rest, the conductor would shout out, "Jerusalem next stop."
Okay, everybody. Are you sitting comfortably, which you appear to be? My name is Rabbi Pete Tobias, and I'm just back to help this congregation find its way into the future, whatever that future might be.
There are people who say that they're Jewish in every part of Scotland. For some, it might be culture. For some, it might be family history.
What being Jewish means to me, that's a very big question.
You probably wouldn't catch me going to a synagogue service unless there was a particular reason.
We didn't want to get dressed up in a suit and go to synagogue on a Saturday. We wanted to be watching, football on the telly.
I wear a kippah all the time.
I cover my hair. This is a wig. That's the way I've been brought up. I don't even think about it anymore.
I am not religious, so it is not the religion itself that makes me Jewish. It is my history, the history of my people.
For me, being Jewish revolves around food.
Latkes, gefilte fish.
Kosher haggis, that's the perfect fusion of being Scottish and Jewish.
You can be Jewish and not eat chicken soup. The world has transformed.
I always felt this, almost like an umbilical cord kind of pulling me to Judaism.
There's a kind of joke, ask two Jews, get three opinions. I love that because as a nerd, I feel like it's a culture that really embraces nerds.
I think today in every community, we have to be a bit more creative. Ultimately, the outside world is going to come inside.
If we're just this unique club that you can only be a member if you have particular genetic credentials, there's a very bleak future for the community. I personally take the view if you're daft enough to want to be Jewish, then we'll have you.
Good evening and happy Hanukkah. Welcome to the Scottish National Hanukkah Celebration 2021.
These candles that we light are for the miracles and the wonders performed by God. The Kol Shmonat Yemei Chanukah Hanerot Halalu Kodesh Hem.
Hanukkah is the Jewish festival of light, and we celebrate it by lighting a special candelabrum that we only use on this festival.
Well, my granny was religious, and she taught me to read Hebrew, to read the prayers in Hebrew, but I couldn't understand a single word. I don't think my granny understood it either.
We light it every night for 8 nights, and each night we add an extra candle. And I think the fact that it's so dark in Scotland so early makes it extra special.
When I first came to Scotland as a tourist in the 70s, I fell in love with Scotland. I fell in love with Scottish history. I felt that the Scots suffered over the centuries, just like the Jews suffered over the centuries and the millennia. And I felt that I may just fit in.
It has to be right side
It
up.
does not have to be right
No,
side
it really
up.
doesn't. So this is the game of dreidel that we play on Hanukkah, and we're just playing for M&Ms. The 4 letters on the dreidel are an acronym for a phrase, a great miracle happened, which is a reference to the miracle of Hanukkah. We'll play one more round. My name's Emily Michelson. I'm a lecturer in history at the University of St. Andrews, and that is how we moved to Scotland.
I'm Bill Shackman. We have 3 children who are now 16, 13, and 10. And the youngest was born here in St. Andrews.
That's not tradition.
We knew that we were taking a risk in leaving a Jewish community in order to move here, but we did, and here we are. We're not.
All right, I get the pot.
How many do you think I can fit in my mouth at once?
17.
What happens to the other half?
Right, spung on top and I'll get a box, okay? We're busy because it's Hanukkah. Lots of people want latkes and donuts. So latkes are like little potato fritters, but better. It's potato, onion, a wee bit of like matzo meal, which is like flour, lightly shallow fried. They are incredible. We literally can't make them fast enough. The festival of Hanukkah, it celebrates a miracle when a bottle of oil in the temple lasted 8 days instead of 1 day. Donuts are fried in oil, latkes are fried in oil. All Jewish festivals are surrounding food, basically. Hello.
Any latkes today?
They're being made as we speak. How many would you like?
8.
8. Right, I need 8 latkes, please.
This is 10 kilos of potatoes, 12 eggs, 6 onions, salt, pepper and flour. That's all that goes into latkes. No secret ingredients.
I'm Doreen Cohen, and I help my son Mark in his deli. I retired from my own catering company, and I thought I was going to be a lady of leisure, but that didn't happen.
No, over there.
Over there, right, sorry. My mum and I work very well together. We can shout and scream at each other, and then by the end of the day, you've forgotten all about it. You know, what goes on in the shop stays in the shop. She's the cook. She can make good food. I tried to make a chopped liver brulee. I wanted to fuse 2 things that I like together, a creme brulee and chopped liver, and it was horrible. Right, so that's 2 fish latkes. Literally just made. Ta-da! That's 8. Okay.
Oh no, I meant 8 packets.
8 packets?
Uh-huh.
Right, so it's 4 to 8 latkes I need, not 8.
I am Rabbi Moshe Rubin. I am the senior rabbi of Scotland. My pulpit position is at Giffnock Newton Mearns Synagogue. When I came here 33 years ago, my own congregation had over 1,000 members. We don't have that today. But what hasn't really changed in Glasgow community is the buzz. Glasgow is an interesting community. It seems to punch way above its weight. Hello, everyone.
Rabbi Rubens.
My senior role deals with many other areas of work. For instance, chaplain to Calderwood Lodge Primary School, which is the only Jewish school in Scotland. So, boys and girls, each and every one of you in this room are blessed with amazing talent. Some of them might be brilliant at maths. Trust me, I'm not one of them. Calderwood Lodge, it's run by East Renfrewshire Council, and it combines Jewish studies and secular studies.
The kippah is part of uniform. The food that's served from the kitchen is all kosher. We have a lot of children in the school who are Jewish, but we have a lot of children in the school from other faiths as well. We have Muslim children in the school and children of no denomination as well.
Bim bom, bim bom, bim bom, bim bom, bim bom, bim bom.
It's important that they have that strong identity of who they are, of their story, of their history, and the importance of community. All this comes from Calderwood Lodge Primary School.
There are plenty of songs that you all know, so please join in and sing along, or in true Glasgow fashion, sing Lie, Lie, Lie.
I was born in America. I left America just after my bar mitzvah when I was 13 years old. And then when I was 20, I married my wife.
So I met my husband on what's called a shidduch. So somebody who knows both families will traditionally call up and say, I've got a boy for your daughter, I've got a daughter for your son. There's phone calls and phone calls to friends, to rabbis, to teachers, just so you get a picture of what the family is like if the families are compatible. And the funny thing was that my father-in-law was speaking to somebody before we got engaged and said, I need somebody for my son, a girl for my son, but not from the traditional Hasidic families. I need somebody with a bit more worldly view. And he said, what you want is one of the Cohen girls.
We're blessed with 8 children. 5 are married, some live in America. When we got married, we decided to come live in Glasgow. Almost 33 years later, it still feels like 2 years. I always refer to my community as a family of families. And yes, I'm maybe at the head of this family. And so is my wife and my children. You know, it's the first family in Glasgow.
You're missing one number.
Why did I get it wrong?
Because you didn't times it by 100. So it's 4%, not 0.4%. So the 2 kids I've got at home, Perla is 16 and Swilly is 13. He just had his bar mitzvah. And even before lockdown, we were homeschooling them to make sure that specifically their Jewish knowledge was on par with their peers in other places. These are the easy ones. All you've got to do is move the decimal point. I teach girls who are coming up to their Bat Chayil, which is their 12th birthday. We have guests Friday night. So that's my domain, to do the cooking.
Hello, Master.
There's lots of places in Scotland where there is a Jewish family. I know that because we send random things that they can't get anywhere else. If people want to eat kosher food, they need to be able to buy kosher food.
We don't mix milk and meat. We have lots of dishes in Jewish households. You know, I have a meat set of dishes and I have a milk set of dishes. And then I've got a good set of milk dishes and a good set of meat dishes. So everything is kept separate.
I'm the 4th generation of my family to be in the kosher food business. My great-grandparents came to Scotland between 1900 and 1910, I would think. And they all came from either Poland or Lithuania. You know, they found their way to the Gorbals, the centre of the Jewish community, and they found help, you know, to settle. My great-great-aunt was Sophie Janine, who had a kosher hotel and restaurant in the Gorbals, very well known for feeding refugees if they came to Glasgow, for example. So following on from that was my great-aunt, Annie Cooper, who had Cohen's Deli. And people even now talk about my Auntie Annie, you know, how they used to go in, they get a wee bit of wurst if they were kids just to munch on so their mum could do the shopping without any interruptions. And she was basically everyone's Auntie Annie, whether you're blood family or not. So then, after my Auntie Annie, was my mum.
It's in the blood.
We keep the community fed on kosher food. Basically, that's it.
I'm Deborah Haas. I'm Glasgow born and raised, and we're in Garnet Hill Synagogue, which is the oldest purpose-built synagogue in Glasgow. I'm the honorary curator with the Scottish Jewish Archive Centre. Garnet Hill Synagogue traces back to the oldest community, which started down in the High Street in Glasgow about 1823, Edinburgh a little bit earlier, about 1816. Dundee's are coming along at that time as well. It's the industrialisation of Scotland that's attracting people into traditional areas for trade and so on. Just before the First World War, we saw a big influx of Jewish people who were fleeing from what essentially was the beginning of the collapse of the Russian Empire. So Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Belarus, Russia itself, and so on. And most of them tended to settle at that time in the Gorbals area. There was the Jewish bakers, the Jewish butchers, the Jewish grocers, everything. People lived in the area, they worked in the area, and there were a myriad of synagogues. You could call it the Glasgow shtetl.
Can't recommend a good barber, could you? Mine's gone out of business. I'm Ephraim Borowski. I'm the director of the Scottish Council of Jewish Communities. I'm an interesting hybrid. My mother's family arrived in Scotland at the beginning of the 20th century as refugees from Russia. And my father was a Holocaust survivor who arrived just before the war, which probably saved his life because 6 of his siblings did not survive.
And then there's a third wave, between 2,000 and 3,000 people who escaped from the Nazis and found sanctuary in Scotland. And while a lot of people were flowing through, a lot of people were sticking.
I don't know if anybody would consider me Scottish, but I consider myself, yes. Well, I used to speak 5 languages. That's Hungarian, followed by Russian, followed by German, followed by English, followed by Hebrew. But I forgot my Russian now. If you don't use it, you lose it. I was born Jewish. My grandmother who brought me up was an Orthodox Jew. She was a lovely, lovely person, and I loved her very much. Then I lived with my aunt, but I was the black sheep in the family. I wanted to learn things. I loved education. I loved school. They were not interested in all those things. So I went to live on a kibbutz. As a child, my granny made all my decisions for me. As a young adult, my aunt made all the decisions for me. The kibbutz then made all the decisions for me. And I said, when am I going to make my own life? So I left the kibbutz and I came to Scotland. Inverness was, in the 70s, much smaller than it is today. It has changed now. But I grew old here and I got used to it. I suppose people got used to me. Well, you wanted to see pictures. My granny kept them. That's the only reason I have them. That's me. That's a small child. Had very long hair, 2 huge plaits. And that was my mother and my father on their wedding day. In 1930-something, I don't even know the date. My father was probably an accountant. I don't know for sure. I think that my mother was a housewife. I never knew my parents. My father was taken into slave labor when I was a baby. My mother, my brother, and my sister were all killed in Auschwitz. My father never came back. Nobody knows where he died, when he died, or how he died, and nobody will ever know. That's my brother and me. The only reason I know his age when he died was because there is a date on the back of the picture. I've got the pictures of my brother, not of my sister. She never had a picture. My father didn't even know he had another daughter. I was stolen out of the Munkac ghetto as a toddler and was brought up by my maternal grandmother and my aunt. They realized that there was something wrong, very, very wrong. They paid somebody, a Christian man, and he went to try to get us out from the ghetto. The idea was to get my brother out. He was 9 years old by that time. I was saved by mistake because my brother was ill at the time, so he couldn't go. So he took me out instead. And then he went back a week or 10 days later to get him out. By that time, there was nobody left. Have you ever heard about the idea of survivor's guilt? I survived, but I shouldn't have survived. It should have been my brother who should have survived. I don't think I can ever forgive myself for being the one who survived. It's not that I don't think about it every day. It's not my fault. I realize it's not my fault. Nothing is my fault. But my brother should have survived, not me. I'm just not a religious person by nature. But there is a prayer that I say 6 times a year. It's called Yizkor, which means remember. And it's to remember not just my parents, but to all the Jews who were killed over the history. If anybody made me Jewish, it was Hitler that made me sure that I remain Jewish forever.
Oh gosh, look at that. That is the best. This is the challah. Challah has become a special bread for Shabbos to remember the manna that we had when the Jewish people were wandering in the desert. And on a Friday, it would be a double portion because they wouldn't be able to go out on the Sabbath to collect it. So to remember that, we have 2 challahs at every meal.
It is like a special women's mitzvah, a special like women's commandment. So I guess like the women in the house
do it together.
Do it together, yeah.
Is it always women that do the baking? Is that, or are men allowed to?
No, but there's plenty men who do it. There's men in the community who do it. The men in our house don't do so much baking, but they do quality control. So for normal Shabbos, we do either 4 plat or a 6 plat. It is quite time consuming. So when my older children were little, I didn't do it for many years. Now you see them all grown up, it's fabulous. And then they come home and become children again. That's
Speaking
her.
of which.
That'll be her.
Oh,
From Israel. Hello. I didn't speak to you since Monday.
They call like at least 3 times every day. One sister, I think, one time called 8 times one day, and she was like, "Oh, I made a new record."
Bye. So that was daughter number 3 in Israel.
Shabbat is a special day when everybody goes to the synagogue. On Shabbat, you really stop everything. No electricity, and so that includes no phones. And so for 25 hours, even in the 21st century, you're not checking your emails or doing this or doing that or even cooking, like you're just being.
Just being.
It's 4 o'clock now, and Shabbat starts in just about 2 hours. So because we don't cook on Shabbat and we don't turn electricity on and off, we need a way to keep food warm. So we have this lovely hot plate, and all we have to do on Shabbat is remember to put the food on it a couple of hours before we want to eat. So it will be on until 10 o'clock tonight, and we have a massive urn so that we can have a hot drink without heating up the water, because even heating up the water counts as cooking. The Sabbath, Shabbat, has rules about things that you should do and rules about things that you should not do. And that's intended to help you have a day of rest. And we rest. We rest really, really hard, I would say. At sunset, or just before sunset, we will light the Shabbat candles, and that is the moment when Shabbat starts. I tend to light them and then say, "We made it." To be perfectly honest, I will say that when we say goodbye to Shabbat on a Saturday night, the first thing that happens afterwards is that everybody runs for their phone. And I have to include myself in this. And at the moment, we have to maintain our wordle streaks. When we moved here, we moved to a place that didn't have any Jewish infrastructure. There were no other Jewish families to our knowledge.
Yeah, the closest synagogue was in Dundee. It sadly closed. When we realized we were here for the long term, we very consciously started having Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur services here for the students. We lived in Jerusalem, we lived in New York City. I miss having a Shabbat community.
I miss having a synagogue. I miss the learning opportunities that my kids have not had.
Our kids won't have a community in the way that we envisioned and would have wanted, ideally for them.
And unfortunately, to feel really comfortable in a Jewish community, it really helps to have practical skills like some level of comfort with Hebrew language, knowing your way around a prayer book, knowing the festivals enough that you don't feel intimidated around certain practices. And it's much harder to give our kids that on our own. And so I fear that they will someday move to a place with more community. And although they have felt really Jewish their whole lives, somehow they won't feel welcome, or they won't feel like they know enough, or they won't feel like they're similar enough to other people they meet.
They won't feel at home.
They won't feel at home.
Yeah.
It's a big gamble, and we won't know how that pays off. This is our heritage and our tradition.
And it's important to us and important to pass on.
And we hope that they also want to carry it on in some way.
The Jewish experience in Scotland has changed so much in my lifetime. I mean, when I was growing up in the 50s, there must have been around 15,000 or so Jewish people in Glasgow, and maybe 20 plus or whatever across Scotland. I mean, now we argue, is there 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 Jewish people in Scotland?
My name's David Simons, and I'm a novelist. We're standing outside the old Queen's Park Synagogue. This is where I had my bar mitzvah. It's where my parents were married, and it's now been turned into a block of flats. This was a very bustling and vibrant community, not just during the week, but especially the high holidays of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. There weren't enough seats. I mean, and it is a big synagogue. And so we always remember that we used to have to lay out rows of folding chairs to accommodate the overspill. And it's hard to believe now that it's no longer the case.
I was brought up in Pollokshields. My maternal grandfather was one of the founders of Langside Synagogue, which sadly is now just a shell of a building.
I mean, the irony is, if you took your religion seriously, then probably Glasgow wasn't Jewish enough or religious enough to be an Orthodox Jew. And so you would move to Manchester, or you would move to Leeds, or you'd move to, more than likely to London. Then there's a lot of intermarriage, which dissipated the community.
Many of the children grew up, they went to London, they went to Israel. And the parents, once their own houses got empty, they followed and they went to live near their children.
Orthodox people will want to have a synagogue within walking distance because they don't drive or travel on Shabbat. And therefore it's inevitable that as people move, the synagogue that's no longer within walking distance gets left behind.
It's like a brick wall. You take a little brick out of the wall, the whole wall threatens to crumble. And that does affect the community. When a shul closes here, a shul closes there, it just leaves a mark. It leaves a feeling the community is shrinking.
I mean, there may still be a significant number of Jewish people, but their lives don't center around this synagogue anymore.
Scotland, and our thought for the day comes from Rabbi Pete Tobias of the Glasgow Reform Synagogue.
Good morning, Gary. Can this really be happening? Are we really on the verge of another war in Europe? The war to end all wars ended just over 100 years ago, and yet was followed by another just 2 decades later. And once again, it would seem the sky... My name is Rabbi Pete Tobias. When I first got here, the people only joined the synagogue because they are not allowed to join an Orthodox synagogue because of Judaism's fairly strict rules about Jewish status. I'm not sure how much that's changed, but in a traditional Jewish world, if your mother ain't Jewish, then you ain't. The Reform movement takes a slightly less rigid view. Shabbat Shalom to you Zoomers, and Shabbat Shalom to those of you who are here this morning. When Reform synagogues were first established over 200 years ago in Germany initially, they were based on the idea that it's meant to be far more inclusive. In a Reform synagogue, men and women sit together as an acceptance that some, if not all, of what's in the Torah was written by human beings. Everybody has a kind of a different point where they draw a line, where they decide, yes, I'll do that on the Sabbath, even though I know I'm not supposed to. Reform Judaism encourages people to make their own decisions on these matters. And no fire shall be lit in any of your settlements on the Sabbath day. So once the rabbis got their hands on it, led to a whole series of interpretations of Sabbath ovens and not switching this on and not heating that up, suddenly became a big part of the observance of Shabbat. Judaism has always adapted, always. I mean, if Moses turned up in Glasgow tomorrow and he went to an Orthodox synagogue, he wouldn't recognize any of it.
Now, in Orthodox tradition, 3 times a day we have our services. So we have morning, afternoon, and evening. In order to be able to do the service properly, you have to have 10 men. We work hard to make sure we get that. And sometimes we have to send out a WhatsApp. We need an extra man, extra 2 men. Why do we have 10? So 10, the number 10 signifies community. Now, the Orthodox tradition is a tradition that follows that we say that what was taught in the Torah was taught to us from Mount Sinai, and whatever was taught, don't change.
In an Orthodox world, by and large, women can only be spectators. That is changing. There is a very large Orthodox feminist movement that is engaging with Torah learning.
I was born into an Orthodox Jewish family, so I really don't have much choice. I'm a Jewish person. I just could not reconcile this question in the Orthodox tradition that women play no part in the service, and it seemed to me terribly, sort of sexist, and I didn't like that.
Part of the idea of why we have the men sort of in one area and the women in another area is so that there's no, to keep distraction to a limit, right? So it's not about one gender being, lesser than another gender.
I believe in equality, and yet every time I go into an Orthodox prayer service, I have to kind of put that aside in order to participate.
We come from a background that says men and women can participate equally in leading a service, in reading the Torah.
I think the pride I have in my son standing there and reading the Torah is that he can do it. Now, I don't know if he wants to go into the rabbinics or not. I don't know if that's he's more into music. He might want to become a rock star. I don't know, maybe.
My dad makes me do it, actually. But no, it's fun. It's good. It's a good skill to have. And it gives you a sense of reward, being part of a community more.
Being on the egalitarian part of the Jewish spectrum for me means being able to contribute to my community.
My name's Ash. I live in Dundee. I'm a voice actor and an illustrator. I wasn't born into a Jewish family. I wasn't raised Jewish. I'm in the process of converting to Judaism. A few years ago, I started reaching out to synagogues in Scotland that I thought I might want to visit. I eventually found the Sukkot Shalom community in Edinburgh. I noticed that there were a bunch of people with pride flags, like badges on and things. So I was like, this is a place where other queer people feel safe. And that was really, really important to me as a queer trans person. I mean, I've been in transition since 2013. It has been a little bit like a second adolescence, so I've been kind of joking about having a bar mitzvah at some point because I never, got that, not being brought up Jewish and, not knowing I was a boy at the time. For me, community and belonging is really, really important because I didn't always have that. I grew up in a place where being different was not okay, like any kind of different. So for a queer neurodivergent kid, it was not a healthy place for me. So once I was in my 30s and kind of living independently, I sort of realised that had been holding me back my whole life and I didn't really know who I was. We're at Tetsmere Beach. It's a place that I've always associated with kind of peacefulness and reflection. I don't know any other Jewish people in Dundee, so I had to do a lot of things to do with festivals or to do with ritual observance on my own. So I like to come here quite a lot now. It can be so hard to measure Jewishness. My perception of it certainly is it's kind of a sort of three-pillar system where there's the ethnicity component, there's the cultural component and the religious component. And you can have any one of them and be Jewish. You don't need to have all of them, but you do need at least one. I feel very at peace when I'm with these people. So it's really sorry. I already feel like I'm part of it. I felt like I was part of it from the first day I went. So for me, this is just kind of making it official.
My name is Anita. I grew up in Aberdeen. I live in Edinburgh and I'm a marketing executive.
May I please have 2 flat whites?
Of course you can.
Thank you.
I roast it all myself. Hellishly strong and devilishly good.
We'll see about that.
Judaism in Scotland is a topic that is, by and large, completely untouched by Scottish education. I was the only Jewish person in my primary school. I was the only Jewish person in my secondary school, which meant that when you know little about something, you stick to the stereotypes because that's all you tend to know. And unfortunately, those were strong anti-Semitic tropes. In primary school, it manifested mostly in physical bullying. I wouldn't say that the kids knew exactly what they were talking about, but just regurgitating things maybe their parents have said or something they've read online. You know, Hitler should have finished the job, which was, as like a 13-year-old, quite nasty to hear and quite scary. That being said, being Jewish in Scotland, actually I met more with curiosity now rather than immediate upfront anger or violence.
Up until the 1500s, coffee was known as the devil's drink.
Oh, no kidding. Oh my God, every day's school day. Thank you.
My parents, whilst ethnically Jewish, aren't practicing Jews. So as a child, I remember researching how religious women would wrap their hair in scarves, much to the horror of my mother. But I always felt this strong connection. So I'm beginning to delve further and further into Judaism. While I was at university, being surrounded by Jews my age was a complete revelation for me. So I choose to practice in a reform way. I go on my phone on a Friday and a Saturday. I dress in jeans during the day. Some women feel comfortable covering their hair and that's their choice. But I don't think I will ever reach the point of doing that myself. However, I guess it depends on who I marry. If they feel particularly strongly about it, I would consider it. I think there is a great deal to learn from ultra-Orthodox Jews, which is why I do go to Chabad, which is an ultra-Orthodox synagogue. I think it is counterintuitive that as a young person, I am drawn to that kind of orthodoxy.
Arranged marriage, for example, is that something you would contemplate?
Oh, yes. But I feel like in this day and age, it's difficult to try and explain and to justify why you're considering it to non-Jewish people. But yeah, husband would be nice. Cut that out. Don't leave that in.
Jacob Steen raised his arms to his side as if to weigh the worth of what he was to say next. Justice and fair play. Never forget that, Avram. We Jews have been treated well here. In other countries, we were persecuted for our religion. In other countries, to be a Jew is to carry a death sentence over your head. And do you know why Scotland is such a fine place for us? No, sir. There is so much hatred between the Protestants and the Catholics. And when they are not hating each other, they combine to hate the English. Ha! What a wonderful city Glasgow is. No one has any hatred left over for us Jews. All writers are writing about themselves. I mean, I think for me, when I look back now at writing The Credit Draper, was the opportunity to write about my Scottish Jewish identity. But what was interesting for me was that I expected there to be all kinds of conflict when this, these Jews would turn up in these villages in Scotland and so on. But I actually found that there was a lot in common between Scottish and Jewish cultures. The violin music, there would be the schnapps, the whiskies and the brandies. There would be social values, I think, respect for education and social justice, which I think are both part of Jewish and Scottish culture. Growing up, for me, there was quite a divide between my Jewish life and my non-Jewish life. We used to come as a family to the synagogue here, Queen's Park Synagogue. And I think that walk sums it up for me. Here we were, sort of all dressed up with these prayer shawl bags with a Star of David on it, kind of quite conspicuous walking, not a walk of shame, but certainly a walk of shyness or embarrassment. I went to Cheder, the Jewish school, after school, 3 weekdays and on a Sunday. Learned Hebrew and studied the Talmud, and I don't think my non-Jewish friends really had any idea what was going on with us after school, and we had our separate assemblies. The Jewish kids were siphoned off, and of course we had different holidays as well when we would be off, and it would be very conspicuous that we were different. Yeah, there's a definite feeling of being alien.
Anti-Semitism is a form of racism directed against Jewish people, stereotyping Jews as having particular traits. There's a long history of conspiracy theories about Jewish control of the media or the banks, as well as religious persecution, I suppose.
I grew up in Hungary, where being Jewish was a problem. As a small child, I remember myself actually lying about it when people asked me, because I was afraid. I've been frightened about being Jewish all my life, so it didn't just change all of a sudden.
Because people feel vulnerable, they are less inclined to display open signs of Jewishness.
My friend who lived across the road was not Jewish, and she was a member of the local tennis club, and I wanted to join, and they would not let a Jewish child join.
If you went through the Gorbals or places, you would see signs, no blacks, no Jews, no dogs. That's what it was. We have moved on a lot.
In more recent times, it's much more focused on anti-Israeli sentiment and the way that the Israeli government behaves towards the Palestinians.
There are political problems concerning Israel. And I had the same problems concerning Israel. But because I'm Jewish, the problems become my problems.
That's lovely. I'm looking at a film that was made of my mum and dad's wedding. They got married in Pollokshields Synagogue on the 22nd of March 1949. Fur coats, It's March the 22nd. They've all got on their fur jackets. Oh, there's my dad and grandma and grandpa. Oh, that's lovely. Oh, that is fantastic. It's my mum under the chuppah. So a very traditional Jewish wedding. But then there was also a big working class population, and their weddings would not have been quite like that. Not in Pollokshields Synagogue. They would have been in one of the shows in the Gorbals at this time. Look at this line of cars. Absolutely fantastic. Ay, ay, ay. Ay, ay, ay. That's a very good question. What kind of a Jew am I? It's my being, isn't it? Even though I'm not an actively religious, observant person, I still don't like the negative bits about it. And there are lots of negative bits about Jewish religious life and so on. I'm the youngest of three, and we were absolutely brought up in a Orthodox Jewish environment. When I got to university, equal rights for women, equal pay for women, women's right to choose was a very important campaign for me. I was quite aware that that did not sit comfortably with Orthodox Judaism. It's like, in a way, I decided to give up eating meat. And the last thing I gave up was my mother's chicken soup. And it was quite a thing to go home and say, I'm not going to eat your chicken soup. So you're kind of living a parallel life in a way. But I do like tradition. My mum and my dad. I tend to come before Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, and just pay my respects, talk to them, bring them up to date with the news. The question of the Jewish way of death, the tradition is in the Orthodox is that it's burial and it should happen as quick as possible. I mean, when my mother passed away, she died in the morning and we buried her in the afternoon, which might seem shocking. After somebody has died, there's a period of a week of Shiva where you're in deep mourning and you will remember the person who's gone and stories, and people will come and give their condolences and so on. And it's an incredibly nurturing and supportive kind of period. When it comes to the bit, I'm a member of the Burial Society. I want to be buried in that graveyard. It's not the most pretty one in the world, but that's the one. Yes, I pay my dues, so I'm going to end up here. We joke about all the characters. I mean, I obviously don't know there are so many people buried here. So I kind of have this vision of this underlife that's going on, or upper life, but I think of an underlife that's going on. But how does one make sense of death? It's part of what happens in life, and but it's not easy.
I'm here today to go to the mikveh. The next stage in my conversion process, I always sort of gravitate towards the really colourful ones. I'm really excited. This has been a 2 and a bit year process of kind of actively working towards this moment. You can do this in a kind of natural, free-flowing body of water, but in Scotland that's not ideal. I thought about going to Tentsmuir for it, and I think if I'd been doing this in July, that might have swung it, but in March, no. I think I joked once about it being putting a Jewish coating on me. Symbolically, that's kind of what it's about, is because the water has to touch every part of you. I mean, I think I see a lot of parallels between my Jewish journey and my trans journey. They are both kind of transitions that have taken a lot of time, but have also been essentially just confirming what has always been there.
Mazel tov. Mazel tov. Thank you so much.
Oh, why am I extra happy today? Why am I extra happy? Oh, it's Purim! I forgot it's Purim! Do I consider myself Jewish and Scottish? Yeah. That is the Jewish story of being everywhere and anywhere.
There's no conflict.
Exactly, yeah.
Being Scottish and Jewish, that's absolutely fine.
The beauty of being Jewish is that you could be Jewish anyway.
Growing up, I lived in a tenement in Pollokshields, and we were only half a block away from a kosher grocer. There were Hebrew classes after school in the local state school. So in that sense, we felt at home.
You know, I think Scotland is pretty welcoming. We were exactly the same. Don't forget that. We were asylum seekers and economic migrants. That's who we were.
Being Jewish means being part of a conversation that goes on over centuries.
This is a tradition that is 3,000 years old, and we carry with us all of that evolution.
Well, hopefully, while there's a community in Glasgow, there will always be a kosher deli.
No two ladies buy the same chicken stock for making their chicken soup, and they'll make the best chicken soup as well.
There is a very particular kind of Jewish humour, finding things to laugh about when things are really dark. And I can very much see why that's a really important part of the Jewish character.
I'm immensely glad that my family washed up into Glasgow and allowed us to have peaceful lives.
I was a happy child, and I'm a happy adult, and I'm a happy and old person. I'm very lucky.
I'm slowly learning about where my boundaries are with the religion. But I bake really good bread, so maybe that will be my redeeming factor.
Very good. That my sisters always come home, and when they eat the challah that my mum makes, they just give like this sigh of like, it's like it's home, it tastes like home, it tastes like our home.
Be'etishan